Jenny invited me to go work for her. She needs some help making her pencil jewelry.
Okay.
So I worked in her studio for her for a year. I a little
More,
bit
I think.
more than that, and we had a blast. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Julia Checo. So we have Irene Ferri, Jennifer Maestre, and we have Michael Mooney, who is going to be our moderator. Yay! Thank you. Thank you all for being here and agreeing to do this. And we're very excited to hear from you. I'm going to let you guys talk and take it away.
We have two wonderful artists here tonight. We're going to have a chance to hear them talk a little bit about themselves individually, but then more interesting, collaboratively, which is more the focus of the talk, how creative collaboration occurs. So you've met Irina, you've met Jenny. These guys have known each other for, I was going to say many years, but I think I can say it, decades.
Decades.
It goes back a while. And that over that period of time, they've found these like interesting opportunities to like cross the beams and work like more closely together as collaborative artists, not just individual artists. Most recently, and I was talking with Irina about what the word is to describe what they're working on. She says, it's experimental. And that they're actually experimenting a little bit about how some of Jenny's media could work in the context of some of the things that Irina is working on that are more furniture-based and more formal. We were saying like many creative pursuits like this, it's a communication thing, so we want to talk to them a little bit about later. Before we talk about collaboration, I want to talk a little bit to Irina about how she got here on this journey as an artist to the asylum, and like talk a little bit about where it all started and when you realized, wow, I think a life in art is going to be my life.
I think when I was 8 years old, it was already decided that I was going to be an artist when I grew up. And when I say it was already, I decided that's what I was told. I was told by my parents, my grandfather, and by myself, obviously. My dad had to go to Italy to work with his father. He had a commission for building the National Monument of Indonesia. So I was somehow taken out of school and spent a few months in Rome in my grandfather's studio, where to me, that's what my parents had told me. I was being trained to be an artist. I don't know why, but...
You were how old?
I was 8. And then at some point, I think they decided that I actually had to go to school, so I got sent off to my grandmother's in London, where I finished the year off there.
But while you were still in your youth, your mother had a studio in Chinatown, where you were exposed to studios on two continents before the age of 10.
So my mother had this space in Chinatown here in Boston when I was a kid growing up that became our kind of after school. And it was called AWA Studios, and it was the top floor of a building on Beach Street opposite South Station, I think. And that was a big communal art studio. And she was a photographer, and there were a few other painters. There was a musician. And they had lots of events going on there. So when I was there, when I was a kid, that was after school.
Right. But you had told me you were like building like furniture for your dollhouse. Here you are as an adult, building furniture.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Did you realize when you were like as a child building
No,
small
I mean,
furniture?
no. When I was a kid, my dad had the woodworking shop, so I'd go there and he'd let me use the bandsaw, and I'd make, dollhouse furniture. No, I didn't think when I was a kid that I'd be making furniture when I grew up.
Right.
At all.
Right. So you were in Europe, you were young, and then you came back to the States for a while. Then you went back to Europe to study again, work with your father. You're older now.
All right, so after high school, I went and I studied graphic design in Rome, and
some schooling in the UK.
That came before. I'm sorry. It's been kind of like all over. I have to remember when and where. Yeah, I did my art foundation in England, in London.
Right.
That's right. That came after Rome.
Right.
So, I can't remember.
You don't have to say which decade.
Just a little bit too.
But so you had some graphic arts exposure.
Yep.
In the UK, and then it was kind of back to Italy. And
Yes.
I don't know, you had told me you had a friend from art school, and then here we are in Florence.
All right, so
Opening a
that
studio.
was that's actually how I met Jenny. Our best friend, Kate Friedberg, was moving from Boston to Florence to set up a photography studio, and I decided to join her at that point.
Right.
I'd finished my studies in London, so I moved to Florence. And I actually ended up then moving sideways back down to Rome, where I was working as a graphic designer. So I only stayed in Florence for about 6 months.
Right, right. So Florence and then on to Rome.
Yes.
And then you're done, right? You're Rome.
Well, no,
what could be
no,
better than Rome?
I stayed in Rome pretty much. I ended up staying in Rome for 15 years.
Right.
And I worked as a graphic designer for many years, and then I went back and I lived in New York City for a while.
Now, see, that's the pivot I want to get to. I'm an artist. I'm working in Rome. I need to go to New York because if I can make it there, I can make it anywhere.
Well,
Like,
no,
what
I
led
did-
you to say I got to go back to the States and experience New York in the I don't know,
Well,
80s?
life just happened like that, right? I mean, I just went back, and then
Right.
I had a friend who was there. In fact, a friend of mine who I met in Rome was in New York City. This was Catherine and Santino, and I went to go stay with Catherine Santino. And I worked for a mural painter then. And I wanted to actually stay in, I had decided that my next form of art was going to be acting. And I called up my dad. I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm going to go to acting school. I'm giving up everything else. And he said, okay, fine. I'm setting up a new woodworking shop out in the countryside in Rome. Why don't you come out, help me set this up, get working for a bit, make some money, and then you can go off and go to acting school. And I go back to Italy, start working the woodworking shop with him,
Right.
and promptly fell in love with what I was doing, and I never looked back.
Right.
So that was the end of everything else.
But there is another pivot. India.
Yes. Yeah.
So when I'm looking at your bio, it's like I'm in New York,
Uh-huh.
and then I can't not be here. I have to be in India, doing what? What was that? What?
Oh, I can speak into the microphone is what I can
Louder.
do. Yeah.
This is in tight. So then there was like an Indian sojourn
Right.
that came along the way.
Yeah, I went to India.
You know.
I went to an ashram.
But
Came back with a different name.
but when I've talked to you about your work,
Yeah.
there is a bit of introspection
Yeah.
that seems to inform your work that came from this meander through India.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about that.
Right.
I'm sorry, I have a hard time talking.
Right. But I guess when I was talking to you,
Yeah.
like the specificness of like the work you were doing in your father's workshop
Yeah.
as a journeyman
Uh-huh.
kind of woodworker, kind of blending a little bit with things that were your spiritual sense from your Indian travels. And then you found your way in kind of woodworking at that point?
Well, I had found my way in woodworking before going to India. What I did in India when I went was I was trying to get away from woodworking.
Right. Okay.
And the interesting thing is I had decided when I was there that I was not going to be making furniture anymore. That I was, at that point, I was doing contact improv dance, and I was making clothing. I was going to the vintage sari markets and making clothing. And I studied and I became a Reiki master, and I came back and I had a different name, and I even made my parents call me another name, which is kind of embarrassing now. And everybody, Candace too, I mean, I made everybody call me this name that was given to me, and I believed it for about a year, I think. But then I went back to Europe, and I had an accident where I lost the use of my right arm, and about 2 weeks after being in the hospital, I was told that I was going to be handicapped, and I was not going to be able to use my right arm for the rest of my life. And that then put an end to this incredible lifestyle that I'd imagined for myself, where I would just be going to India every winter and making stuff and dancing on the beach, and and then coming back and selling what I was making in Europe.
Right.
And so I had to find a way to survive, and I had to get through, I guess, a year of physical therapy. And I had all these clients in Rome who were like, hey, listen, come back and make furniture. And strangely enough, that was the most powerfully creative moment in my life, I have to say. I had a year of challenge where I really couldn't work with my right arm, but I could use the bandsaw. So I would make small scale models
Right.
And I could use a sander, I could use the bandsaw. I would make small-scale models. I worked with the clients, and I worked with other woodworkers who were able to help me to make what I was making.
Right. So that was in a studio setting too, then, because
Yeah.
I know when we've talked, there's sort of this through line where my mother's studio, my grandfather's studio,
Yeah.
my father's studio, and here we are.
Well,
A2.
okay,
In a
so-
studio again.
So the interesting thing about being at the Artisans Asylum is that I, from a very young age, probably formed from those experiences, from being in my grandfather's large atelier type place to my mom's studio. I'd always dreamed that I would be part of an incredible warehouse space with a lot of other artists who all did something different, and we could
Right.
all collaborate and
Right.
work together. So for me, a dream of mine has always been to find a way to collaborate with other people.
Right. Which leads me to Jenny.
Yeah.
So how did you all meet then? It sounds like you knew each other
Yeah.
before you had gone to Rome on.
No,
Well-
we met in Florence.
Yeah, we met in Florence.
We met in
Like,
Florence.
you know, everyone's able to sort of say that, right?
Yeah.
Is this on?
We met in Florence. It's a
Yeah,
postcard.
yeah, you do, because if
It's
you
a
don't talk
postcard.
into it, it doesn't hear you.
Oh, all right.
So you
So,
can say anything.
Irene and I met in Florence. I was dating a guy back then whose sister Kate lived in Florence, and we went for Christmas time, and I met Irene, and she scared the crap out of me.
Thanks, Jenny.
Wait,
We
because?
we were doing Christmas shopping, and I didn't speak any Italian. And my friend Kate said, okay, you and Irene can go shop together. You don't want me to tell? No, it's a great story. So I went with Irene. She was wearing like
embarrassing
blue tights with the ladders going up them, little shorts, and a fur vest. She was like stupendous. And I was like this scared little mouse. I'm like, who did they stick me with? But you know, that's Irene's spirit. She's got a great spirit, and she's got a really artistic spirit. So that's how we met.
So then, years later, you have this chance to meet again, or something. You had a showing, and you saw her work.
Well, no,
or-
yeah, but also not only that. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Jenny was the partner of my best friend's brother. So we would, and they're really close friends. So we would see each other often. When I came back to Italy, when I was living in Italy, I came back to visit one summer. I went to go see Jenny's work at a gallery in the South End. Do you remember what that was? That was the first time I had seen your
I
sculpture.
don't remember the name of it. They're closed a long time ago.
Okay, well, that was there on Thayer Street, and I saw Jenny's sculpture, and I just started laughing hysterically. I thought it was the most wonderful thing I'd seen. It was the
Right.
most whimsical, hysterical, spirited. It just represented a being that doesn't have a face, right? Right.
Now, I'd like Jenny to talk a little bit about her work. We've talked a little bit about the journey that
About-
Irena was on,
Yeah.
but the
About
journey
my
that you were on.
Background?
Yeah, a little background on like.
I'm not used to these things.
I know they're no.
Okay, so, well, I grew up in a family. My father first was an astronomer, and then he became a banker. And my mother was always artistic, and so she would do crafts and sell them. She did crafts to help put my father through business school. So she would do silkscreen and paper mache and batik and all kinds of things like that. So she would always have my brother and I work along with her doing our projects. So we learned that way. So then when it came time to go to college, my father really, really wanted me to go into business, which was not my forte, but I went to college anyway and studied economics majored in economics and art, fine art. Wellesley College. And so, needless to say, those two things don't go together very well. And so, when I graduated from Wellesley, I just kind of was completely baffled what to do because I do not have a business personality. I could not see myself on Wall Street or working in a bank. So I just worked kind of a million crazy odd jobs. Or I worked at Urban Outfitters, I worked as a go-go dancer, not a stripper, a real go-go dancer. And I worked like at a restaurant, you know, all kinds of weird things. And then I got a job at a type foundry called Bitstream in Cambridge, Mass. And that was a great job because I could design fonts and things like that. And but then my father got really sick, and they moved back to the States. And I was concurrently taking night classes at Mass Art in painting and animation and stuff like that. And my father passed away, and then I got laid off from my job. And one of my Mass Art painting teachers was telling me, you should really apply to go full-time because you have some talent, you know. So I applied to Mass Art. They turned me down. I applied a second time. They turned me down. So I went back to the admissions office, and I was like, you guys, I really want to go to this school. And a few years later, I saw the transcript where the people write their notes, like when they review your admissions things, and they wrote lacks vision. And I was like, okay.
Last laugh.
Well, that was funny. They were probably right at that point.
So were you admitted then?
Yes, so
the story has a
they
happy ending.
They finally let me in. Thank goodness I got to transfer a bunch of my credits from Wellesley, and so I didn't have to take all the stupid like history classes and stuff like that and language because I'd already done all that stuff. And I was a glass major, and then when I graduated from Mass Art, I realized glass is way too expensive, and you need kilns, and you need, you know, all this stuff. And I was like, I can't do that. So I was thinking of something kind of less, what's the word?
You were, like, in some of your notes, you said, prickly things.
Well, oh, yeah.
I thought it was a perfect sort of sharp objects. You were working with glass, but you were trying to find another medium that would be more forgiving, more affordable, but still prickly, sharp.
Right. So
scary.
When I was at Mass Art, I took a small metals class, and I saw a poster advertising a competition for a piece of jewelry that included a pearl. And for some reason, I thought, wow, I'd love to make a tiny little sculpture of a sea urchin with a secret compartment that holds a pearl. And the sculpture would be all spiny and sharp, and it would be really pretty, but you wouldn't want to touch it. But if you knew the trick, you could pull on one of the spines, and a little box would come out, and there would be
pearl within.
This precious thing hidden in there. So that's where my obsession with pointy things started. And so I started making urchin forms out of nails pushed through window screen. And then I started making bigger forms out of nails, but I couldn't get like a lot of different forms. So then I was looking around like, what else is pointy that I can get a lot of? And I was like, pencils! So that's where all the pencils come from.
So pencils has this like thing, they're so utilitarian, and they're so available, and they're so hidden in plain sight. But you found there was something about them that just like, oh.
They were pointy.
They were pointy,
That was it.
prickly objects.
Yeah.
But there's an organic sense to them, though, that like, I think like the product designers that I know now, they try to escalate and said, it's biomimicry. It's like, I don't think you were thinking biomimicry when you're thinking
No.
working in more organic forms. That word wasn't in your head. It's like
No, well, the way I construct the sculptures is, and this all leads up to Irene's.
Yes, we are going to close the lab. But
So the way that I construct the sculptures is I drill a hole in every single little pencil point, in every little pencil piece, and sew them together. So it's actually a kind of fiber art. And that way of creating the thing automatically makes it organic looking.
right. When you, in your like statement, you were talking about beads, and I was thinking like bead in my head is something more this, but a piece of pencil with a loop on it.
Anything with a hole in it is
Is
a
a-
bead.
We've learned this here tonight. So, Irena sees your work. You guys haven't seen each other for a while, but you've known each other. Did you imagine that you might be like kind of simpatico artists? Like, oh, I like your work. Oh, I like your work. How does it reach the jump to like, maybe we might do something together?
Well, yeah, like I said, when I saw Jenny's work, I really liked it. But I was living back in Italy then. Still, I had Dante when he was a kid, and Jenny was here. So when I moved back here, I guess about 10 years ago,
Right.
Jenny invited me to go work for her. She needs some help making her pencil jewelry.
Okay.
So I worked in her studio for her for a year. A little
More,
bit.
I think.
More than that, and we had a blast. I absolutely loved it.
So, like her materials, jewelry as the medium.
Yeah.
But, so, what was that collaborative process like? Silhouettes, shapes, the experimentation.
Here,
at that
I'll
point?
let you talk to.
Was it
You're
experimental?
better at talking.
Well, yeah, so the pencil jewelry grew out as an offshoot of the sculptures because when I had open studios, I thought there has to be something that someone could take away with them. So what I would do is glue pencils together in blocks and slice them up willy-nilly, and then take the slices and make jewelry. And it wasn't so much about the design. It was just like, oh, this is a really cool piece. I'm going to make a thing with it. And then I needed help, and Irene came, and she designed stuff. Like, she designed it, where I'm just like, oh, that looks cool. She's like, yeah, you can do this, and you can do that. And so, that's sort of where this kind of thing
Yeah.
came from,
Yep.
right?
But some of your rigor, as you've told me about that, working in your father's studio, is like, oh, we're building like a piece of woodworking that has to fit a spec and
Yep.
dimensioning things, and like talk
Yeah.
more about your sensibility in that way.
I can't really talk about that. Sorry.
It's a little more specific.
Well, is there
Yeah.
anything else to say about it? I mean, I'm used
You're
to
a dr-
working.
are you-
I'm a designer.
But like
With
a draftsman?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I'm also a draftsman.
And so when
Yeah.
you're a draftsman aesthetic,
Well, I mean, I'm trained as a graphic designer. I have years' experience of doing working drawings and architectural drawings for interiors
Right.
and plans. So for me, it's all very much about planning things out and designing it and making it fit.
right? And when you encounter something more organic, you said, wow.
Yeah, no.
this is
So this is what we're trying to do now. Is that we're trying to find a way to bring some of her really beautiful, almost accidental things, because we don't. Every time you cast something in pencils, we don't really know what it's going to look like. You can't control it into some of my more rigorous design pieces. So we're trying to. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen. We're just beginning it.
Right.
And it's a interesting process because there's been a lot of times when we don't communicate. There's a lot of times when we do communicate. There's times when we can really understand each other, and then other times when the words just don't. We're not speaking the same language.
But those times usually don't have to do with the materials.
they have to do with what? The composition?
No, not even that.
Not even
Yeah,
that.
it's like-
Well, see, if you've known each other for this long, it could just
Yeah.
be an aside. But when you know it's working, what's the feel? How do you know it's like that this is right?
I think it's working. We always know it's working.
Yeah.
Just sometimes we don't. Well, we're both talking about the same basic materials, but
We have different language for it.
yeah.
So that is literally what I meant by this, that we don't have some. Are you trying to find words to describe a feeling, an idea, and an image is really, really difficult.
Right.
Uh, well, yeah, it's just you have different ways of describing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when I was talking to you about your work, it was like there's an idea, and then there's a movement, and then there's a spirit line that
Yeah.
runs through it. So even
Yeah.
as a word guy, I was like, I'm going to need more than that.
I don't
It's
see
like-
anything else.
But then when you started to use it in
Yeah.
reference to referring to the pieces in front of me, oh, the way it occupies the space, the way, the materials have been combined. There's a story within, but some of the stuff, even your work over here, the resins and things, the translucentness of some of the pieces seems like a shared part of your aesthetic, that color and translucency. And is there like parts of your sort of language that relate to the way you're making the pieces that is a common language?
I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know. How can you
I
tell
don't
when a
know.
piece is done? Back when you were doing
Maybe.
jewelry,
It
did you
might-
say, this is done? Oh, this is done.
I don't know. I can't answer that.
Right.
I have
That's
no
why
idea.
I became a sculptor, because I always knew when it was done.
Yeah.
A painting, I could never finish.
Right.
But the sculpture, it's done.
Yeah.
Right. Now see, they're hard not to crack here. This is like the secret language of collaboration. So, I don't know. I would think there's probably collaborative artists out here themselves that know how to like thread a question in here. So, I would throw it out to folks in the crowd.
Hi, it's a question for Irene. How was your experience in Rome, growing up as a young woman in Rome? How has it affected your art and your artwork?
I don't know if that's how, I don't know how to answer that.
When I think about like working in a workshop in Rome with
mean,
artisans, it's like
it-
there's a
you
pretty
know.
long history of that going on there.
Yeah.
So, did you feel that sense of history when you were there? That Roman artisans and woodworking.
No,
and, like,
that was when you're a kid, that's your reality.
It's just
That's
dad
just
and
yeah,
wood.
that's just your reality. Right.
What are some of the difficulties that you ran into when you were collaborating, if you could change it?
Well, you can't really change who you are, which is so. And I think that it was specifically that of it's mostly the language, because when you're a visually inclined person, you're not finding the right words doesn't work, or it doesn't work for me. I can't.
But we also had scheduling problems.
Well, yeah, we had
So-
mostly
Yeah,
scheduling
we had a
problems
lot of those because
with grown-ups.
yeah, and there was like I started working teaching an after-school program with first and second graders, and I think I got sick like every single week. So I'd be like, Irene, I can't come into this week because I'm sick again. And so it's things like that, and that was putting us behind schedule, and that was very stressful because we wanted to work together, but then I'd be sick, or then it was the holidays and family
And I can't work over
things.
the holidays.
and-
I got family. Right?
yeah, so that was part of the stress of so far, but hopefully we've got clear sailing ahead until the
Yeah.
COVID-19 hits.
Oh my God.
So when you say words fail you, when you're collaborating by phone and you're describing things, or are you looking at the same things on the screen at the same time? Are you using visual references, or is it just language? You're trying to have a
Just-
conversation.
Just conversations, even language,
Right.
talking over the phone. Talking over the phone. Talking in person, never, but talking over the phone, yeah.
Right. So what's an example of like something you would say and she would
Oh, no.
misinterpret it?
I
It's
can't.
like-
I can't.
It was
Oh,
like,
I have one.
Yeah.
It was just about the nature of this discussion.
right.
Because I've done panel talks and I've done slide presentations, but I've never done both at the same time. And so I was really confused which it was going to be. So that's, things like that
Right.
don't matter for the art at
Right,
all.
Right.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
all right. So
What's-
actually, that's something which I should be talking about. All of this experimentation I'm doing now is I'm doing research into the surfaces to put into my furniture. The images you see on the wall now are just samples, and those are just samples of pieces which will be inserted into furniture, and the whole point is that the geometries and the textures are not just going to be on the surface, but those lines will carry through into the actual form in the three-dimensional. This is a conversation that I'd actually had with Michael in the past about what my ultimate goal is to produce a line of furniture. I've only up until now made bespoke pieces for clients, and I want to produce a line which I then put in a gallery and show. And this is going to be pieces which are going to have the designs on the surface carry through to the form and the shape, and then I have this sort of element that carries through it. So the design in the surface represents the thoughts that precede the action, which is represented by the shape in the three-dimensional, and then this kind of line that runs through it is supposed to be the spirit which carries it through. Beginning.
Are you trying to reach out to designers and architects?
Well, eventually. Not to architects and designers because I'm a designer, but mostly to galleries. Eventually, when I'm ready. I think it's going to take another year.
Because you,
Yeah, well,
Because
this
you
is just the surface. I have to now create.
but you were
create the
showing me
rest.
some of the pieces where it actually turns the corner.
Yeah.
And then when you have two faces, makes you interact with it in a different way.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge?
Well,
if
that's
you're
a
seeing it-
challenge which I'm about to, and so that's the next phase, and
'Cause it
that
would
will
seem-
probably in 6
'cause it
years,
would
in
seem
6
like
months, not 6
that
years.
perspective is going to become even more sculptural,
Yeah.
similar to the work Jenny does, to have a three-dimensional visualization of
Yeah.
this and seeing things in section. I guess some of the interesting magic of like when you see Jenny's piece and you imagine what would it be like in section, and that
Damien Hirst.
right. But then when it's in resin as well,
Uh-huh.
and like Jenny was explaining to me that some of the points in this are like, I said, wow, they're like, is that all pencil in section? Some of them are tiny pencils that she gets from Japan that are little tiny leaded pencils that come with little pencil sharpeners and like working at scale by finding, industrial materials from around the world. I think it's interesting. So Jenny was concerned that even from where you're seated now, fluorescent light from above does not do justice to the richness of the resin emulsions of the media here. And so she wants to make sure that you're invited to come up and like see this up close.
Just don't touch her sculpture.
Don't touch the sculpture.
Yeah.
It invites you
Don't
not to
punch
touch
it.
it. That's
Yeah.
the thing.
You can
Don't-
touch it, just don't punch it.
Yeah.
But you can imagine some of these, that some of the resin emulsions that when they're like backlit in a certain way, or if they're in ambient lighting of a room, there's a real, dimensionality to them, even in 2D, that you should experience up close afterwards. So, any other questions? Go ahead.
When did you introduce the epoxy? When you were doing the collaboration with Irina?
No, when I started making the jewelry, because I would laminate
Yeah.
pencils in blocks and then chop them up and use a slate. There's some pictures in the, I don't know if that's showing here, but there's some pictures of some little things that look like houses. That's some of the pencil jewelry. Yeah, and I keep all my scraps, so all the leftover little pencil bits that I had, I would glue them in like facing each. That's what that little bright panel is. That's all leftovers from making my sculptures, and I don't advance very far past that grid. That's why I need Irene.
But it's funny because I use remnants too. That's actually how I started making all of my composite surfaces too. Is I had a whole bunch of materials left over from the Venture Cafe, and I had all this beautiful old, reclaimed wood, which I had to use up somehow.
So, your separate shared raw materials,
Yeah.
you can mix and match from your collections of stuff,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Cool. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Irene, where's some of your work? Where is some of your work in commercial areas?
The Venture Cafe, Cambridge Innovation Center, Toscanini's, Sonia's nightclub, Zuzu's.
Where is this?
It's in Cambridge. Yeah, myself. Yeah. I did Converse, Lovejoy Furniture Project. I don't know. And then in Italy, of course, when I was working there. Well, yeah.
So to really see my work, you have to go to Italy. So you had a question?
For either or both of you, are there any artists in particular who you look towards for inspiration?
Ernst Haeckel.
Say that again.
Ernst Haeckel is one of my inspirations. Ernst Haeckel, Forms in Nature. He drew all these great drawings where he would put different animals, like he would draw like, here's a bunch of sea urchin forms, here's a bunch of octopus. If you ever see any octopuses around, they're probably copied from Ernst Haeckel. Like he's a genius. Well, he was a genius. I think he's passed away a long time ago, but yeah.
So, Irena, you were telling me that there was a Cambridge-based woodworker. So she recounted me this story. She goes, so we're driving out to my father's studio in the countryside, and I'm looking through a woodworking magazine, as a child would do while Dad drives. And you came upon this woodworker who was doing
Judy,
these fine art woodworker based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is where you were born, and like, that's what I want to do. And you had some imprinting moment with her work?
Yeah, so Judy McKee is a furniture maker, and her furniture is actually on view. You can see it. They're permanent pieces in the Museum of Fine Arts. So that was my first encounter with sculptural furniture, where I realized that furniture could be art, or art could be furniture. And I discovered her work when I was 25, when my dad had started the woodworking shop, and that was actually discovering her work when I, at the moment, was at the time when I realized that that's exactly what I wanted to do.
Right. Cool.
She's a genius.
In the back?
Yeah.
I have a fun fact for Irene. She grew up with all this art, and her parents actually met on the set of Cleopatra.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
This is
Yeah.
Irena's story. So her mother's an artist, her father is an artist,
Yeah.
but they met on the set of...
Cleopatra. Yeah, Mom was reading. She was working with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. They were reading scripts. She was working on the production. I think Dad was an extra. Yeah. Yeah.
Did I hear something about Fellini? Or
Yeah, but he was part of my grandfather's entourage.
can you give us, like, in a nutshell, like a little bit of that?
A little bit of my grandfather's scene. Well, my grandfather's a sculptor and a painter, and he had this studio in Rome where he worked. But I guess it was like I don't know how do you say, it was like he had this enormous space and lots of pupils who lived there and worked with him, and he worked on monuments, and I don't know, a lot of people coming and going. Yeah.
It's like a teaching hospital. We have nowadays.
Right. Okay. All right. As Vicky says, it's like a teaching hospital. All right, lots of people coming.
I was talking about my grandfather's studio, monuments and stuff, working on monuments. You say that so cavalierly, and yet most of us don't have that.
I'm sorry, I'm really crap at talking.
I think it's charming. Well, the idea that, I don't know, some of your artist journey starts there in your youth, and it goes all around the world, and then here we are at A2. And
Well,
you still, this vibe of like artists working together is still important.
Well, I think that what is the most important thing to be able to make an artist is that you are made as an artist. I was made as an artist because of my parents, because of the way that I was raised, because of the way that I was raised to view the world, the fact that I was free, that I traveled, and life wasn't easy. My parents were not rich. Things weren't handed to me on a platter. But the most important thing that was taught me was the joy of life and whimsy, and just that life is funny, kind of, and nothing's really to be taken too seriously.
Right. I can only imagine.
Except the triangles.
Except the triangle. Don't fuck with the triangle.
There is some on the wall. So is back here, question?
Yeah.
What was your special name that you came back?
What?
Your special name from India?
All right. Madhava Tariqa.
Madhava.
That means divine star. I told everybody. I made my parents call me Tariqa for a year. They were really good.
How about in the back? You had a question?
Oh, I work with whatever woods I can find. So recently, I've just been working with woods that that are left over from different projects that people throw away. I'm basically just using scraps, people's scraps. Have we ever been there in the woodworking shop where people throw away their scraps? That's where a lot of the wood comes from.
So what was the beautiful redwood that I asked you about? And you would just throw it cavalierly, oh, it's
Purple Heart?
Purple Heart.
I bought that one.
Purple Heart is a
Yeah.
beautiful piece
Yeah.
of wood, and it's so valuable that she uses it.
Well,
The
funny
inlays
enough,
are very.
wait, my favorite wood that I'm working with now is some wood which is left over from the project I did for Converse. And they gave me this wood. It's white oak that was in the water for 100 years. It was part of the original piers over at Lovejoy Wharf. So they had taken these out, they had milled it, and they gave me some of the wood to be able to make a table for them. And I still have pieces of it. And what's really beautiful about it is that it was in the salt water for 100 years with nails in it. So it has these streaks in it, which are black and smoky and create the most beautiful patterns in it. So that is my favorite wood at the moment. I just need more of it.
It's cool. In the back?
By the same token, are there any types of woods or materials that you found to be particularly difficult to work with, or just haven't worked out?
Yeah, there are some woods which I cut into. I can't remember the names of which the colors are just awful. And there's some woods which are really beautiful. So not all mahogany is the same. Not all oak is the same. I'll spend quite a bit of money and spend a lot of time processing, and then realize that it's just the wrong shade. It doesn't go with that white pencil. I don't know.
Do you have preferences for manufacturers or particular colors of pencils?
Did you hear it? Manufacturers or colors of pencil?
I like Faber-Castell pencils, but I can't afford them. But they did send me a big box of seconds from their factory in Germany, and they were way better. The seconds were way better than the firsts I got from the other places I got my pencils.
So Faber seconds better than most firsts.
Yeah. Well, because I was buying really cheapo pencils, because, you know, a lot of pencils.
Anyone else? Yeah, what is it about a Faber?
The colors of the leads are really intense and pure, and they're just really well made. Like when you go to drill a hole in a little section, it doesn't break in half because they actually put some glue in there. Things like that. That sculpture's made with Faber-Castell pencils.
Hey,
That's
Jenny,
why
I
it's
have
so
a question.
beautifully blue.
Jen?
Emphatically blue.
How many pencils went into making that sculpture, do you think?
I don't remember.
Like hundreds and hundreds, right?
Hundreds. It's probably, what is it? I forget the thing. It's like 9 pencils per
Square inch?
square inch, something like that.
Wait, I love
Maybe
the
that's
color.
not exactly right.
Emphatically blue. I would go see that band.
How many it took to finish it?
What?
How many pencils did it take to finish?
Is that a puzzle?
It's different from how many takes to make it, to finish it. I don't know.
Is there scrap?
That's my husband. He's trying to prank me.
We're not listening to you.
It sounds like the experimentation is going to continue.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. 'cause
Yeah, so this is literally just the beginning. This is baby steps. So this is just the beginning. This is just so far, we're still trying to experiment as to how it's going to work out.
Right. I don't know. I think it's very exciting.
Thank you.
We should give our collaborators a hand.
So we